There were hundreds of games created for the Atari 2600 over its lifespan, and many of them are improved over previous games. Understandable, since memory got cheaper and programmers got more experienced over time. So let's take a look at a bunch of games that were improved by subsequent games. How about we start off with the game that gave me the idea for this video, which is Starship. Ugh. So, I don't even remember this game existing back when I originally had my 2600. Not only was it one of the earliest space shooter games, it was one of the first batch of games created for the 2600. But I noticed that it did not appear in any of the later catalogs, at least the ones that I had as a kid. So, I don't know, I guess Atari was embarrassed about this game, and I think they should be because it's kind of lame. Basically what you do is you just fly around and you shoot spaceships and stuff, and honestly, this game is just so incredibly boring. Now here we have Star Raiders, which is a huge improvement over Starship. You still fly around and shoot enemies, but in this case you have a galactic map where you have to find all of those enemies and destroy them before they destroy your star bases. It's got fast action and decent graphics for the 2600. Then finally we have the pinnacle of the space shooter games, and that would be Solaris. It's very similar to Star Raiders in the sense that you have a galactic map and you travel from sector to sector destroying aliens. However, in this one you can also land on the planet and save trapped, I don't know, are they miners or workers or whatever? The graphics and sound and gameplay in this game are just absolutely fantastic, and a huge, huge improvement over Starship. Next we have the flight game called Air Raiders, and this one's pretty fun. You just fly around and shoot enemy aircraft. For an early game, it's actually pretty good. What's nice is you can even land too. Here's another early fighter game called Spitfire Attack, and if I'm not mistaken this one was from Milton Bradley and it had a little handle joystick kind of shooter thing with it. I found this one to be pretty fun, and I really like the graphics on the ground. You can kind of see like a winding road there, pretty neat. You also have to avoid anti-aircraft fire, and you can't be too low to the ground or you'll crash. Then we have Radar Lock, which is, again, a aircraft fighter simulator game. It's got a lot of fast action, and I kind of feel that it's similar to, Afterburner. Pretty awesome graphics here. Obviously, they use the same engine as Solaris. And our final improved game would be F-14 Tomcat. Now, this is more of a simulator game than an action game. But it's a lot more realistic than any of the previous games, and it just goes to show you how much fighter simulator games have improved on the 2600 over time. Alright, now let's get into sports games. Here we have basketball, and this is just your basic one-on-one basketball game. Despite it being very primitive, I actually enjoy this game. The only downside is that if you don't know that Game 2 is the one-player game, then you're going to be confused if you just start it up. Because strangely enough, Game 1 is the two-player game, and Game 2 is the one-player game. I don't know, it seems kind of backwards. Here's Realsports Basketball, which was an unreleased prototype for the 2600, and as you can see, it would have been a huge improvement over the original basketball game. And this one, it's 2-on-2. It actually feels a little bit more like, I don't know, NBA Jam. Shooting is a little bit strange. I mean, you only have one button between shooting and passing, so how does it know when to shoot and when to pass? Also, your players are stuck on a plane, so they can't move up and down very far. But I think with some more refinement, this game could have been pretty good. Now here's the really improved version of basketball for the 2600, and that's Double Dunk. This one feels a little bit more like one-on-one basketball, except it's 2-on-2. As you can see, the graphics on the players is much improved, although the floor is a little bit plain, but still a huge improvement over the original basketball. Here's Breakout, which is kind of the sequel to Pong in my opinion. I mean, it's kind of like a one-player version of Pong. All you do is just hit the ball and try to knock out all the bricks. What I always do is try to hit the sides so that I can get my ball above the bricks so that I don't have to knock them all out manually. Takes quite a bit more time unless you do it that way. Next we have Super Breakout, which has the original Breakout variation plus a lot more variations to it. I like this one. I think it's called Cavity, and you have a couple of balls inside of the bricks here, and if you knock them out, then you get multiple balls. And here's another variety. I think this one's called Advance, where the bricks constantly move downwards. This one's kind of fun because it just never ends. It just goes on forever. And the final improvement to the Breakout style game is Off the Wall. And this one you play as a peasant knocking down, I guess that's the Great Wall of China. And you can get different power-ups and things like that. Ultimately, the goal is to not really knock out all the bricks, but to hit that worm that's at the top. At least I think it's a worm. I don't know. Maybe it would have been better if it was a dragon. Alright, here we have another sports game, Bowling, which is really one of my favorite bowling games of all time. This is actually a really enjoyable bowling game, and there's not many bowling games out there that I would rather play. Maybe Wii Bowling. But then you have to stand up to play that game, and, you know, I'm lazy, so I prefer not to. Just a basic, fun bowling game, really. And thank God I keep score, because I don't know how to score this game. The improved game is a homebrew called Strike Zone, and it is incredible. The graphics are just so great. At the beginning of the game, you get this cool little cutscene where you drive up to the bowling alley and get your shoes from Mario, apparently. And throughout the game, there's other cutscenes, like if you get a strike, you might get a strike cutscene, or your character fist pumping. Or if you get a spare, you might see the ball hitting the final pin. And then at the end, you might see, you know, a little cutscene of the cafe or the bathroom or even a pool table. That's pretty cool. So yeah, Strike Zone. Huge improvement over bowling, although, you know, I think I would still play bowling. Here's Buck Rogers' Planet of Zoom. And this is just kind of your basic shooting game where you hover over a planet and try to avoid towers and shoot enemies and things like that. It's supposed to be based on the Sega arcade game, but this version really isn't much like it at all. Also, what I don't understand is, why do the towers get closer together as you move closer to them? Shouldn't they be getting further apart? I don't know, I guess it's just Atari logic. Now, in my opinion, the game Moonsweeper is a pretty big improvement over Buck Rogers. In this game, you start off in space avoiding, I don't know, the sun spots or comets or something like that. And you're supposed to land on the planets and try to save the, I guess they're the miners or whatever, kind of like in Solaris. Also, you have to shoot the enemies on the planets, or I guess they're the moons, maybe. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Solaris here. I mean, it is very similar to both of these games, and it is a huge improvement over both Buck Rogers and Moonsweeper, and Star Raiders, and Starship. It's probably the best of all these space shooter style games. How about bug shooters? Let's start with Centipede. By no means is this version of Centipede bad. It's a very good game. There's only real two downsides to it. There's no trackball control, and the graphics are a little bit weak. But the gameplay is fantastic. It's really fun, it's fast, it feels like Centipede. The improved version of Centipede, of course, would be Millipede, and this one has more bugs, advancing mushrooms, DDT bombs that you can explode to kill the bugs, and just a much more frantic pace than Centipede has. Next we have Activision's bug shooter, and that's Spider Fighter. Now, I'm not going to say Spider Fighter is better than Millipede, but it definitely has more colorful graphics, and also it does have fast gameplay. Also, you're still shooting bugs, which, you know, it's always a good thing. Here we have Defender, Williams' classic shooting game where you fly over a planet and try to protect the humanoids from being abducted by aliens and turned into mutants. And you have this really long shooting laser that comes out of your spaceship. There's a bunch of different enemies to fire on and everything. It's a great game. I poured so many hours into this game, it's crazy. But I will say, it does not feel very much like the original Defender. It's really its own thing. And that doesn't mean it's bad, it's just different. A similar game is called Star Gunner. In fact, it's so similar, some of the sound effects are the same as Defender, especially that shooting sound. This one is a little bit different in the sense that you have this alien across the top who's just constantly dropping, I don't know, other aliens, and you have to shoot them. But it is still a side-scrolling shooting game. Whether it's an improvement over Defender, well, I don't know, maybe. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Then we have Activision's Chopper Command, still a side-scrolling shooter where you're supposed to defend, in this case, trucks from being blasted by helicopters and jets. I feel like the graphics are a little bit more detailed here than in Defender, although the downside is there aren't as many enemies to worry about. Or maybe that's a good thing, I don't know. And finally, we have the coup de grace of side-scrolling shooter games for the Atari 2600, and that would be Stargate, or Defender 2, whichever you prefer to call it. Now, this one actually looks like the arcade game in terms of the setting, whereas the original Defender, I don't know, looked like you're flying over a city instead of over a planet. This one also has more accurate-looking graphics, and really fun gameplay. Alright, now we have a stationary shooter game called Condor Attack. I don't know if this one came out after Demon Attack or before it, but still you're shooting what looks like birds. There's like these smaller birds at the top and the bigger birds in the middle here. I don't think there's like a shield or anything, so you're pretty much on your own. Graphics are a little sparse and the animation, I don't know, seems a little janky. The whole game feels like it's struggling, honestly. Then we have Demon Attack, which most certainly Condor Attack was copied from. This one is a classic. I think it's Magic's most popular game, and basically you just shoot at these, well, they look like birds to me, but I guess they're some kind of demons, I don't know. Sometimes they have different styles of weapons. They might just shoot a whole bunch of bullets at you, or they might shoot long lasers at you. They all have these erratic kind of motions that make it more challenging. And then there's enemies that break apart and turn into smaller demons, which is much more challenging. I think an improvement over Demon Attack is Atari's Phoenix, which is a arcade conversion. I believe it was by Centauri. And in this one you still have these birds that are attacking you. It starts out with these small birds, and then graduates up to these bigger ones where you can shoot the wings off, and they'll still keep coming after you. But the coolest part of this game is, yes, the mothership. Something that Demon Attack has in other versions, but not in the Atari 2600 one. This one's one of my favorite shooting games on the 2600. Now here's one that's a prototype called Pleiades. Pleiades? I don't know. I think it's a star cluster. I don't know where that name comes from. But I do know it was originally an arcade game, and this prototype was obviously never released for the 2600. But it starts out with you on this planet shooting these aliens coming after you. You've got these satellite dishes over there on the right. Then you have a mothership style stage here where you have to shoot the alien moving around. And then lastly, you have to move your ship up to the top of this rainbow pyramid. I like this game because it has a lot of variety to it. Next we have Donkey Kong, and no, this game was not intentionally crippled on the 2600. Gary Kitchen did his best within the memory restrictions that he had. Believe me, I've talked to him personally about this. But this game is really not all that bad. You still have the two stages that most people get to. You have the slanted platforms that the barrels roll down, and Mario actually looks, you know, basically like Mario. Donkey Kong looks like a big giant poop monster, but other than that, this game is not that bad. Now, I'm not going to say that Donkey Kong Jr. is an improvement over Donkey Kong. In fact, I think it's far worse in terms of gameplay, but it does have 3 screens, which Donkey Kong does not have. But the real improvement with these Nintendo games on Atari is Mario Brothers. This game is great. It does feel different than the original arcade game, but it still has all the enemies. Mario looks like Mario. It's got really fun gameplay, and the controls are great. I mean, what more can you ask for? I still played this game a ton back when I was younger, and I think I became pretty good at it. So yeah, Mario Brothers, a huge improvement over the original Donkey Kong game. And yes, I'm aware that there's homebrew versions of Donkey Kong which are a huge improvement. Like this one. And this one. Okay, here we have football, and this is about as basic of a football game as you can possibly imagine. I mean, you do have different plays, which is kind of nice. You can throw the ball or run the ball, and at least there's 6 players on the field. So you could actually have some fun with this game if you look for it. Then we have Super Challenge Football from M Network. I have no idea how to play this game though, but it is a little bit more advanced than the original Atari football game. Then we have Realsports Football, which is even more advanced over Super Challenge Football. I think Atari was a little miffed that Intellivision was calling them out on their lousy football game, so I think they tried to top Intellivision with this one. And this one's pretty good. Again, you can pass and run and do all the football things. The field is much bigger than the one in the original game. And then lastly we have Super Football, which is definitely the best of all of these games. This has got basically the same perspective as, say, I don't know, Madden for the Genesis or NFL 2K2 for the Dreamcast, you know, behind the quarterback. But again, you have different plays, you can throw, you can run, you can kick, and this is definitely the best football game for the 2600. Next we have a top-down run-and-gun called Frontline, and this was originally an arcade game, but the 2600 version is pretty good actually. The stage moves from top to bottom, and there's a lot of variety in it too. You kind of start off in this forest scene, and then you move on to, I don't know, it looks kind of like a canyon scene maybe? And then even further on you're going through what looks like a desert with cactuses and everything. And then finally, it looks like you get to, I don't know, maybe the enemy fortress, and you have to defeat the enemy boss here at the end. But what's cool is that you get to jump in tanks. I really like that feature. Next, we have two games from Atari that are arguably, I can't pronounce that word, arguably, better than Frontline. First, we have Ikari Warriors, and you're still running and gunning and shooting and throwing grenades and jumping in tanks, and I think you can even jump into a helicopter. The difference, though, is that this game doesn't seem to end. It just goes on and on forever. There's no boss like in Frontline. Then the other game is Commando, which I find to be similar to Ikari Warriors, although you can't jump into a tank. You still run and gun and shoot and throw grenades and that kind of stuff. There's some variety in the graphics, although I could never get past stage 1. You got the trees and, I don't know, what are these, bushes? So while I would argue that Ikari Warriors and Commando are an improvement over Frontline, that's not to say that Frontline isn't a fun game, because I think all three of these games are great. Here's an adventure game called Haunted House, and in this game your goal is to find the 3 pieces of the urn and then escape the haunted house. You gotta look out for the ghost and the bat and the spider. Also, you have a limited number of matches to help you see a little bit better. The downside of this game is that the haunted house itself is very confusing. It's kind of hard to tell which floor you're on. Everything looks the same. Now, a definite improvement on Haunted House is Adventure, and this is one of my favorite Atari games of all time. The goal, of course, is to find the magic chalice and return it to the gold castle while avoiding the bat, the 3 dragons, and getting lost. Fortunately, you have a sword, a magnet, and a bridge in order to help you out on your quest. Also, you're going to need the keys in order to open the castle doors. So a game that I think is an improvement on Adventure is Montezuma's Revenge. This is still an adventure game where you're, in this case, you're looking for treasure. Find the keys, open the doors, and you have to avoid skulls and spiders and, you know, electrical gates. Also, you gotta jump over snakes. Can't have an adventure game without snakes, right, Indy? Okay, here we have another sports game. This would be Home Run, and, oh gosh, this game is basic as it gets when it comes to baseball. There's different game variations where you have multiple players on the field, but I mean, this barely qualifies as a baseball game. The graphics are just so incredibly sparse. You don't even see a diamond. I mean, all you got is 4 bases to run to. Next we have Super Challenge Baseball, which is a much improved version of baseball. Well, I mean, it looks more like baseball anyway, but trying to get the characters to move and play the way you want them to, it's just, I don't know, I don't find the controls to be very intuitive. Here we have Realsports Baseball, and Atari kind of took a cue from Super Challenge Baseball, I think, in that the game is, I don't know, it looks better, but the controls are, I don't know, not intuitive to me. Also, the sound effects are a little wonky. I mean, instead of the umpire saying strike, it's just a really loud, obnoxious noise. Here we have Super Baseball, which I don't find it to be any better than Realsports Baseball. In fact, I think it's a little bit worse. Especially in the players, they don't look very detailed. Hitting the ball is harder than it needs to be. I wasn't able to do it. And then pretty much every pitch that I threw was a ball. I don't know, I don't find this one very intuitive and definitely not as good as our next game. Lastly, we have the best baseball game for the 2600, and that is Pete Rose Baseball. A huge, huge improvement over Home Run. To me, this is a much more modern style baseball game, something you'd see on, I don't know, the Genesis or the Nintendo. There's nice animation in the pitcher and the batter as they throw and try to hit the ball. Catching and throwing the ball is also very intuitive, and you can actually hit a home run now and then. Here's a top-down racer called Indy 500. And you have to use the driving controllers with this one. Or in this case, I'm using my Xbox 360 controller and just crashing into everything. Doesn't work as good with a controller. Also, it doesn't work as good without a second player, too. There are single-player games here, but it's more time-based, just to see how quickly you can get through it. There's no, drones or anything to race against. This one does have some nice variety to it besides the basic racing. There's this game where you try to see how quickly you can get this blue dot. Alright, the improved game is called Sprint Master, and I don't know, maybe it's debatable that this game is better than Indy 500 because there's a lot more crashing going on in this one. Also, you're using the joystick controller here, which makes the game a little more difficult to control. Pressing the gas pedal makes your car go super fast, and then that makes it easy to crash. The improvement in this game is, of course, multiple tracks, different surfaces to race on. You got dirt, you got blacktop, you got ice, and also you can play against the computer, which is nice. Here's another racing game, in this case, Night Driver. This is more of a behind-the-car racing game. And all you need is the paddle controllers here. You just hit the gas pedal and drive as fast as you can and see how far you can get without crashing into the cars or the side of the road. Very basic game. Activision improved on that racing style with Enduro. Here you have multiple settings to race in. You've got your normal, I don't know, grassy road setting, then you have ice, and then a sunset setting, darkness, foggy road, and then early morning once again. There's also multiple cars on the screen in which you have to pass a certain number of them to continue the game. Our next game is Pole Position, and this is, I think, an improvement on Enduro and Night Driver. And I think it's because this one is an arcade game, and you also have an end to it, whereas Enduro just keeps going on and on forever. And then lastly, we have Fatal Run, which again improves on all of those games. Basically, the story is that you drive down these apocalyptic roads trying to get medical supplies to the different cities. And all the while you're avoiding enemy cars who will just soon knock you off the road and steal your supplies. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Mad Max. But this one is so advanced, it has a radar screen, it has fuel gauges, damage gauges, miles per hour, different weapons that you can use. This one is definitely a huge improvement over the original Night Driver game, that's for sure. Now for another sports game, here we have Miniature Golf, which I feel like this is in the same category as Starship. Atari kind of quietly hid this game after a while. I don't know if it didn't sell very well, or if it was just very confusing, or what, but it doesn't seem like it's very well known. Once you figure out what to do though, it's not bad. You just have to hit the ball into the hole here. The blue square is your club, and essentially you want to get that club as far away from the ball as possible, and then hit the button to hit it really hard. The further away from the ball you are when you hit it, the farther it goes. Not a great golf game, but it's a start. A slight improvement on Miniature Golf is just golf. This one has your player on the screen, and depending on where you're standing in relation to the ball is how you're going to hit it. Like if you're standing directly to the right of it, you're going to hit it down, or if you're standing to the left of it, you're going to hit it upwards. Once you figure that out, it's not bad. I mean, this might keep you entertained for a few minutes anyway. So here's the much improved My Golf. I believe this was only released in PAL territories, but as you can see, this game looks really, really good, and it's pretty fun actually. You can choose from different clubs, and you can choose the strength of your swing, and also the direction of your swing. The downside is that you can't see the entire course on the screen, nor does it scroll, so you have to go from screen to screen. This one is a very advanced golf game, and really puts miniature golf to shame. Next we have Pac-Man, and of course this is a game that was infamously bad. Most people don't like this game. To be perfectly honest, as a game, it's really not that bad. It's just not like the original arcade game. Now the reason why the background is blue is because at the time Atari had a mandate that only space games were to have black backgrounds. Also, to save memory, the maze is symmetrical, and you'll notice that it kind of repeats over and over again. The funny thing is that I've always enjoyed this game. It doesn't really matter that it was not like the arcade. In fact, I kind of preferred that it wasn't like the arcade because I sucked at that version. Now here's Alien. A lot of people say that this is an improved version of Pac-Man. In the game you have a flamethrower which will make the aliens turn away, but you can only shoot it left and right. You can't shoot it up and down. Also, if you get the little flashing star thing, you can then, I don't know, eat the aliens, kill the aliens. I'm not sure what you're doing with the aliens here. The other thing is that the aliens don't really look much like aliens. They just look like big mouths with legs. But in some ways, yes, this is an improvement over Pac-Man. Another improved game would be Lock and Chase. And this was originally on the Intellivision, and it was ported by M Network. I think they realized they would make more money creating Atari games than creating Intellivision games. Basically, you move around the maze collecting, I guess, money and avoiding the cops. You can close doors behind you that will slow down the cops. Alright, the game that really improved on Pac-Man was Ms. Pac-Man. I remember thinking at the time, why do we need Ms. Pac-Man? We've already got regular Pac-Man. What's the point? But of course, this one is way, way better than the original game. The mazes are different, but that's okay. I mean, at least you have several different to play in. Also, the ghost behavior is different. They run away when you eat a power pellet, unlike the original Pac-Man game where they just keep going in a direction. And then finally we have Junior Pac-Man, which throws in everything but the kitchen sink and, well, probably even the kitchen sink. Here we have fast action gameplay, scrolling mazes, many different mazes, multiple variations, and it is quite an achievement over the original Pac-Man game. Now there's also been several homebrew Pac-Man improvements, but I'm mostly impressed with the one that was able to recreate the original arcade game in only 4K. That's the game we should have had back then. Alright, next we have Pitfall, the original jungle adventure game starring Pitfall Harry, whose goal is to run and jump and hunt for treasure in this jungle. You have to avoid rolling logs and snakes and jump over crocodiles and tar pits and all that kind of stuff. My favorite part of this game is swinging on the vine. Now here's Pitfall 2, which is a huge improvement over the original Pitfall game. Not to say that that game isn't great, because it is, but Pitfall 2 just really expands on that original game. Not only can you run left to right and right to left, but you can also explore this cave deep underground. My favorite part though is swimming in the water. I think that's just so incredible how it looks. Going over the waterfall is just the coolest part. In terms of gameplay, this is a very deep game. There's a lot of different elements to it. Sometimes you have to float on a balloon, and you have to know exactly which ramp to jump off of to find the Raj Diamond. And it's a real endurance test to climb all the way to the top to save Quick Claw. Here's Peles Soccer, which is a laughably bad soccer game. I can't believe Pele actually put his name on this game. It's essentially a 3-on-3 soccer game where your players all kind of stay in the same triangular formation, and I find it funny that the characters look like ovals. Alright, next we have International Soccer, and the characters here look way more like actual people, and the soccer field looks way more accurate as well. Although this must be indoor soccer because the ball keeps bouncing off the sides. I find this one to be much more playable than Peles, and definitely a huge improvement. And then lastly we have Realsports Soccer. Here the characters look even more like real people. Although I do have one question. Where's the goalie? It's still 3-on-3, but this one is way more playable than either of the other two games. Okay, here's Stellar Track, which is the classic mainframe computer Star Trek game. It's basically just a text game where you fly from sector to sector and destroy Klingons and protect star bases. I mean, no, it's not Klingons, no, enemy aliens, yeah, that's it. I guess maybe this should have been the predecessor to Star Raiders and Solaris, but oh well, I'm gonna go with it. Despite the lack of graphics and the simplicity of the game, I've always enjoyed this one. The first thing you need to figure out in this game is how to move. Once you figure that out, the rest of the game is pretty easy. If you want to fire photons, you do have to be lined up with the enemy, but if you want to fire your phasers, it doesn't really matter. You just have to use enough power. Okay, so next we have Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator, which is based on the arcade game. Now, I put these two games together because, you know, they're both basically Star Trek games, and I wanted to show how they've improved. This one is more of an action game, but it's still the same idea. You travel from sector to sector, destroying Klingons and protecting your starbases. You can fire photons or phasers, and you can also dock with the starbase to regain your energy. This really is a great conversion to the arcade game. Alright, next we have another arcade conversion, which is Vanguard. And you fly your spaceship at first horizontally, shooting enemies. You can touch the energy box to become invincible. But the cool thing about the game is that you can shoot in 4 different directions. We also have vertically scrolling stages. And you think you could just stay in one spot to avoid the enemies, but occasionally they come out of the sides and hit you anyways. There's also a boss at the end of the game called the Gond. That's G-O-N-D, not G-O-D. And he's pretty easy to beat. Alright, here we have Laser Gates, another side-scrolling shooter. What you do here is fly through this cavern, and you shoot enemies along the way, and you avoid these laser gate things. And sometimes you have to shoot through these white barricades. It's a pretty cool game, although I wish it was a little bit more full screen. And then here we have Flash Gordon, which I think is based on the movie, but I'm not sure. You fly in what I assume is War Rocket Ajax, shooting enemies and flying through this tunnel. You have to reach all these little points, and when you do, enemies appear, and you can either shoot them or just run away from them. In a way, it's kind of like Pac-Man combined with a shooting game. Vanguard, Laser Gates, and Flash Gordon I think are pretty underrated games. Here's Video Olympics, or in this case, Pong. And I hope you don't need a detailed explanation of Pong, because it's probably the most basic game ever created. The funny thing is though, I wish Atari had called this game something besides Video Olympics, because it doesn't make me think of Pong. Now I know the Sears Telegames version was called Pong Sports, but ugh, who wants to play the Sears version of these games? An improved version of Pong would be Tennis. This one's from Activision. Let me just say, in this game, the computer is relentless. I think I picked the hard variation because I can't even get a point on this thing. And then lastly, we have Realsports Tennis. I find this one to be a little bit better than Activision Tennis because I can actually score points against the computer. Also, the characters look a little bit better too. And I haven't figured out exactly how to do it yet, but you can kind of control which direction the ball is going to go, which is extremely important when you're playing a tennis game. I mean, you want to hit the ball where your opponent is not. Here's Video Pinball, and I make no apologies to the fact that I actually love this game, but it really doesn't feel too much like real pinball. It's kind of its own thing, but you do have the flippers down at the bottom, you have the rollovers, you have the bumpers, you have the spinners, you have the drop targets. It's fun just so long as you don't expect it to be like real pinball. Here's one called Bumper Bash, which looks way more like a real pinball table. Although hitting the ball feels a little janky. The physics don't feel quite right, but they don't feel right in Video Pinball either. And then lastly we have Midnight Magic, which is licensed from the Broderbund game David's Midnight Magic, although the table is nothing like that original computer game. This one has 4 flippers, which is pretty cool, multiple drop targets, a spinner in the middle of the game, some rollovers on the side, and as you can see it's just a huge improvement over Video Pinball. I mean, this one actually looks like a pinball game. The best thing about it though is that I feel the physics are just spot on. The ball behaves just like it should. And lastly, we have Zaxxon, which is originally a 3D perspective arcade game that apparently Coleco could not quite replicate on the 2600. Instead, they chose this forward-facing kind of game that doesn't look very much at all like the original Zaxxon game. But that doesn't mean it's not fun. You still have to avoid the walls and shoot the fuel tankers on the ground, avoid the enemy ships in space, and finally reach the robot at the end and destroy it. This isn't too bad, it just doesn't look like the original arcade. Then we have Desert Falcon, which kind of proves that Coleco could have done a 3D-esque version of Zaxxon. Makes me wonder though, has someone hacked this game into Zaxxon? That would be pretty cool. The interesting thing about this game though is that you can collect hieroglyphs on the ground, and if you collect them in a certain order, you'll get different power-ups. I think that's a pretty neat concept. One thing I did notice is that the stage kind of just repeats itself over and over again. You get these same 3 towers, and occasionally a pond will go by. Nothing really changes much until you get to the boss. If you can even get to the boss, because this game is hard. Alright, well there you go, a bunch of games that have improved on the 2600 over its lifespan. Now I didn't highlight a lot of homebrews, only Strike Zone, and that's just because I wanted to show how that game improved over the original bowling game. I just wanted to focus on the games that were created during the system's retail lifetime. So did I miss any games? If I did, please let me know down in the comments. I want to thank you for watching, take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye everyone.